All right, hello. Thank you all so much for being here. My name's Mel. I'm stepping in as the town's interim community development director, and I'm joined by some of our amazing staff. Yes, I'm sure you know everyone. Nice.
I'm Troy, you know me.
Dara McDonald, town manager.
Come on in.
Hello.
And I thought we could just spend a few minutes doing introductions of folks in the room. If you're willing, do you want to go first, Donald?
Jonathan Ogello, I work with Andrew Hadley and I do my own stuff, studio.
Kent Coward, I'm an architect and serving on town council and here with Alex from my office as well.
It's been on our advisory committee, Andrew, for the past year, so he's really been deep into this planning process, and thank you for that. Alex,
Yep, I'm Alex. With you, Ken.
thanks for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself next?
Mike, right angle construction.
And I'm Mel. I don't know.
Hi, Mel.
Before, but nice to meet you.
I think we've talked on the phone, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice to meet
Thanks for
you.
being
Yeah.
Jim.
I'm Jim Jose with SHM Architects here in town.
Quick
Andrew Hadley.
intros.
Andrew had the architects.
Awesome. And then we have two Bens online. Do you want to introduce yourselves quickly? Ben Henson first.
Ben Henson with Allengare Architecture here in town.
And thank you. Ben White.
Yep, the Ben White Architecture, and I have no clue if this mic is on.
We can hear you. It's on.
Oh, good. Okay, got it.
Well, thank you all for being here. So we are here to talk about the community plan. We're going to do just a short presentation, just some background about the plan itself, and then we really want to leave the bulk of this meeting to just have a good discussion with you all on the various focus areas of the plan. So we'll get into things like parking requirements, neighborhoods, and then some of the different corridors of town. We scheduled 2 hours. We can definitely see how the discussion goes, and we don't want to keep you from your dinner or anything. So we'll just have a good open discussion with you all. So let's get right into it. Why are we doing this community plan? So just have kind of a quick intro, but we all really love Crested Butte and its small town charm and sense of community. And I'm sure you all know our architecture, our look and feel of the town, our scale really makes so much of that charm and why we love this place. But we're changing. A lot of change is happening to us, and we've been happening incrementally. And a lot of this has been really slow change through the past over a century, from our mining era to our recreation era and transformation into a ski town. We've also had things like Vail purchasing the ski resort and the COVID pandemic, and really big things that we feel here locally. But with all that and a lot of other things, a lot of growth is happening to us and around us. And Crested Butte's landlocked and limited in our development potential. And an unintended consequence of that we see in so many other ski towns is that our market is really out of balance. Our free market is catering to amenities and tourism. Think like, sorry, I don't know why this keeps going forward. Think like a higher end hotel or a higher end restaurant is what we're seeing the free market produce, while our community needs affordable housing, community serving housing, things like childcare, space for local nonprofits and things. Those are becoming pretty much fully publicly subsidized, and the town or the county has taken on a lot of those responsibilities. So we're really seeing this bifurcation in our market. And with a lot of that, a lot of our community livability is eroding. Things are more expensive. Cost of living is higher. We're seeing a lot of people leave. We're losing our full-time residency. The more people move away, the more people are commuting into work, the more traffic congestion and all of those things. And it's not just housing, it's not just transportation, all of that's connected when it comes to livability. And we're seeing that erode, and I think we probably have been for some time. So this community plan is really about trying to be proactive and really identifying work towards the future our community wants. Instead of letting this change happen to us and reacting to it, can we take the reins of that and grow into being the community we want to be? So with this plan, how do we guide growth to really meet our community needs? Can we be strategic about our remaining development potential in Crested Butte? and try to bring some balance back into the market through regulations and incentives and work to improve livability holistically. So the town has done an amazing job of building so much affordable housing. Over a quarter of our housing stock is deed restricted, but it's never going to be enough, and we can't bear that burden alone. We're never going to be able to fund as much housing as we need or build as much housing as we need. So how can we, through this, try to have the free market be a better partner with us instead of this bifurcated market? So what you see on the left here is a yield analysis of the town, and under our current zoning regulations, there is still quite a lot of build out potential in the town through either vacant lots or potential redevelopment lots that aren't meeting their maximum allowances. And what we found is that we do have the potential already under our current regulations for 606 more residential units, 300 of those being accessory dwelling units, and then 258,000 square feet of commercial space. But the question with this community plan is, what will that be? And is it what our community wants and needs? So can we look at our code and really shift that to meet more of the community's needs? And feel free to jump in at any time with questions, but we'll get to the discussion quickly. So the goal of this plan is really to improve the livability, functionality, and sense of community in Crested Butte by leveraging our development regulations to stimulate more free market investment in community serving housing, businesses, and nonprofits. We're really trying to do this strategically, and we've been doing quite a bit of planning. I'm sure a lot of you have think back, how did we start talking about the compass like 4 or 5 years ago, and it's still going on, but that's been very intentional. So back in 2021, we started with doing the community compass that was really the first step from going from a reactive community to a more proactive and strategic one, where we said, let's start, all this change is happening to us. We got to start somewhere. And the best place to start is, what are our shared values and goals to guide us going forward? From there, that stemmed directly from those values and goals are more of our vision, plans, and strategies to meet those goals. So we did the transportation plan, the historic preservation plan with Andrew was on the advisory committee for that. So thank you, Andrew. The climate action plan, and now this community plan. This plan will set the vision and strategy to then go into codifying those in our regulations and programs, our zoning code, our building code, our housing strategy. What are we prioritizing next for what housing we try to build, and other things like that. And all of that directly influences what you see on the ground. Homes coming up in Paradise Park, transportation, mobility projects going on. They all tie back to those compass values and goals. And with this community plan, it's all about identifying the vision, and directly from that, that'll kick off once it's adopted this summer, would be an update to our zoning code to really codify that and enable that vision to happen through our regulations. And at the same time, we would do a housing and resilient community plan that would be about implementing that vision. What are more incentives, programs, things we can do to partner with the code to really drive towards meeting that goal? We also last year, and it was adopted, sorry, it keeps jumping forward, in December was the historic preservation plan, which identified the town's historic preservation strategy going forward. And that will really influence and update also later this year to our design standards and guidelines, which, as you all know, really can go hand in hand with our zoning code. So we can definitely answer or talk about anything related to that today as well. And we've been doing this for over a year. We've had a lot of outreach over the way. So if you've been participating all along, or if today is the first time you're really jumping in, that is totally okay. Any feedback we hear throughout the process, we really value, and we'll make sure to insert in the plan. And now is a really great time at the draft plan to get a lot of really constructive feedback to help improve that. And then when we do go into the code update later this year, there will be a lot more research around property owner outreach, public hearings, workshops, things like that. So in the draft community plan, hopefully you had a chance to take a look at it. I know it's a little long, but at least maybe you had a chance to read the executive summary. But just to give a kind of primer to what's in the draft, introductions, the boring stuff about the plan, its process, like we just talked about. Then we go into our context. What are those challenges we're really trying to address with this plan, and what are some opportunities to look at, as well as identifying success measures for the plan. And then what we want to focus on today is around Crested Butte's future, which is really identifying that vision for the future and then unlocking potential. How do we look at the tools available to us through our zoning code and recommend or identify some potential zoning changes to actually enable that vision to happen? So the vision is really all about keeping Crested Butte, Crested Butte. We don't want to lose the soul of this place, but the soul has to do with our people. And how do we really retain that? So how do we really keep a thriving, close-knit community? We have and retain our small town charm that's preserved with really thoughtful in-town growth. This plan isn't all about we gotta have skyscrapers and turn into New York City. We want to keep Crested Butte, Crested Butte. We see opportunity in our vision to really have vibrant commercial corridors with more mixed use around local businesses and housing, really retaining the historic small scale feel of our neighborhoods with more diversity of housing, really having those strong community connections and shared spaces. And in the end, while Crested Butte's not easy to live in or to come to, we know it takes effort and it takes grit, but it's possible to build a future here. You can do it. You don't have to have wealth or something to get in. If you put in that effort, it could be possible. If you're a lifty or something else, it's all about that possibility, but making sure that, it's not completely out of reach for someone.
That being the goal.
Hmm?
That being the goal, to reel it in somehow so it's not out of reach for
Yeah.
local workers.
Yeah, I mean, how do we really keep a diversity of a community and it's not
Right.
just kind of an enclave for few folks? And the success measures identified in this plan, and these are really about creating kind of a rubric around any zoning changes or things like that we're considering. This is that rubric to make sure, is it worth it to really consider this? Is it aligned with the goals and values of this plan? So we want to align with our physical character and the integrity of our historic district. We want to increase full-time occupancy, increase the quantity, variety, and distribution of deed restricted housing. So something so special already about Crested Butte is that quarter of our housing stock, it's dispersed all over town. It's not like we have one part of town, that's where all the workers live. Increase opportunities for establishing and retaining community serving businesses, strengthen social connections, maintain our rough edges, and support the town's transportation goals and the town's climate action goals. And a lot of these things are really connected with transportation and climate action that if we can bring more housing and more community serving businesses into the town where infrastructure already exists, we have an amazing walkable, bikeable environment. How can we help support those goals in ways where people are living closer to where they work? They don't need to commute in from far away. That is one great connection there. So now for the rest of the scene, we really want to focus on the toolbox, getting wonky here of all those things you guys are experts in of the town zoning code. And what the plan does is it looks at our code and its influence on market development and what are those key tools that we could dial up or dial down to help enable that vision to happen. So the three big things are land use, what uses do we allow and where, density, how much of that use, and then fit. How does that use fit on a site? So things like height, setbacks, open space, and parking. And of course, snow storage is a huge part of that. And think of this like a mixing board. Insert different areas of town. We can dial these uses up or down to really meet the needs of the community. So right now, in all of these categories, Crested Butte is on the bottom, on the more restrictive side, where we have very specific requirements for different zones about what uses are allowed, how much of that use, and how it fits. And it's very prescribed. On the top is more of the Houston model. Let the market dictate it. You can do whatever you want. But in the middle, something we're looking at through this plan is something we're calling performance bonuses or performance requirements, where we're saying, are there things we could give a little, give some allowances or bonuses for, say, a little bit of increased height or a little bit of reduced parking or a little more increase of residential density in exchange for getting what the community needs out of it. So in exchange, can we get a percentage of the development to be deed restricted commercial or affordable housing? So running through an example of this, and I think this should be the last couple slides I'll talk about, and then we'll go into a discussion. An example of performance-based zoning is with Sixth Street Station. So you might remember this was approved in 2016. It has since expired and that land has since sold. But it was approved for 62,000 square feet of commercial space to be a luxury hotel, 33 units with 66 keys. And out of that, through our ROA requirements, we would have gotten 3 affordable housing units. Another example that has expired, another example that our consultants for this project put together of something that could kind of be marketable and meet our code would be 5,000 square feet of retail. From that, we would get 1 ROA unit and some payment in lieu, so just under 2 required there. But what if it could be different? Because think about with our current land prices and current costs of construction, likely something to develop there. It's probably going to be a pretty high-end development catering to amenities and tourism to be able to recoup the cost of that and make it a viable project. And of course, we'll require some ROA units. But what if it could be different? So one idea through this plan and introducing the idea of performance-based zoning is, can we leverage some of those tools to get more out of it of what the community needs? So right now, could we say we do limit in that corridor saying that no more than 50% of a parcel can be used as housing? What if we say more than 50% can be used so you could have ground floor retail and 2 stories of housing above? We could keep the FAR the same, but allow higher residential density. And for fit in the scenario, which we looked at this at the design charrette last September, if any of you guys came to that, I think Kent was definitely there. We said we could give 3 extra feet of height as a way to really maintain that corridor and what's special about it, but make it so you could have more viable ground floor commercial with 2 stories of housing above, where right now that would be pretty tight. Increase the front setback by 5 feet and then reduce parking. In this scenario, they looked at 1.8 spaces per 1,000 square feet of commercial and 1 space per dwelling unit, recognizing that our transportation plan looked at our on-street parking capacity around town and identified you really have a lot of on-street capacity that could absorb that. And you could leverage that to reduce parking requirements. And in this, it resulted in 25,000 square feet of retail. And for those exchanges, if we gave these bonuses, we could say in exchange, 20% has to be required to be deed restricted. We could get 16 affordable housing units instead of 3. So that's just one potential idea that came out of this. Right now on 6th Street 2, actually came about through 6th Street Station, but we have performance-based zoning, but it's kind of producing the opposite of what we need. Right now, we give a bonus FAR if they put in underground parking. But because underground parking is so expensive, it's kind of producing the opposite of what we would need, and that to recoup that, we probably see the ultimate luxury product come out of that. So it's thinking of that same concept, but tweaking it to be a little bit different. So from there, we're going to kind of run it through different focus areas of the plan and just go over what we're thinking and considering in the plan for each area, recognizing this, it's not a blanket approach across the entire town. So we'll first talk about parking and parking requirements, because that kind of has its hands on everything across town. We'll go into the neighborhoods, and then we'll talk about Bellevue, 6th Street, and the Slate River annexation. And what we'll do is Jesse, Troy, and I will kind of introduce each area, and then we'll just pause at each one and just have an open discussion to hear your feedback, your thoughts. You guys are the experts in this. You dive into our code so much. We want to hear what would actually work. What are you hearing from your clients or folks that you work with? And what do you think could actually improve this plan and these considerations? And Kent, since you're an art advisor, would love for you to absolutely jump in and help with anything too. All right, so I'll turn it over to Troy to talk about parking.
The idea is, obviously, you guys know parking takes up a large part of the sites and precludes development opportunities. Our parking requirements are direct relationship to what is on the site. So, in looking at the Slate River subdivision, which is the drawing or picture of Pyramid with the school, there was a school bus, all the trailers and excess. It's not really being used as development, but that is town property. And looking at TP1 and TP2, which you're looking at, the sledding hill sort of is adjacent to TP2, TP1's on the left. If we developed the current parking standard for TP1, we get about 14 units with the parking requirements. We can get to 45 if we lower the parking requirements down to 1 parking space per unit. And we would create a neighborhood permit parking if people wanted to park more at their site. They could park on Pyramid with permit parking. As you can see, there's excess parking available. The trailers would go away. They wouldn't be given a permit. A lot of those aren't even Crested Butte residents. Most of them are actually unincorporated county or non-CD residents. So that's the idea, is how do we use parking to leverage development opportunities? Clear opportunities where we have excess parking available on street. It would work, so don't think of it as a blanket. Is it then going into the neighborhoods, reducing parking requirements in the commercial areas, reducing it down in the existing historic neighborhoods or the neighborhoods in town? It really is a question of what's available on street. And this isn't a mandatory reduction. As you guys know, we have an absolute parking requirement. You have to provide the number of pit. You can't go more, you can't go less. That's how the code is currently written. The way we would rewrite this code is giving lower the maximum, but not significantly, and eliminate the minimum, and give the owners the choice. So if the owners want to eliminate their parking, they can do it in exchange for certain things. And the town owns TP1, so we would probably leverage that opportunity and go with a lower parking ratio and use Pyramid as the access parking. So let's just pause there with residential parking, giving the owners an opportunity to lower their parking requirements in exchange for certain things. What are your thoughts on that?
Where do the cars go?
That's my thought.
On street. So again, on Pyramid, the extra cars could go on street, but right now we have pretty high parking standards. So if you look at Anthracite Place, it doesn't completely fill up. And so when you go into certain deed restrictions, the parking ratios are very different. When you start to get to deed restricted housing, the parking requirements are lower in walkable communities. So the intent of the mobility plan is to give transit as a choice. And the owners could then choose to lower their parking ratios or not, and then use on-street with permit parking to guarantee extra spaces.
And yes, we do know we have to move opposite sides of the street in the winter, and that's an inconvenience, but it all comes down to trade-offs here of like, would someone trade off that inconvenience if they have an extra car to move it every other night in exchange for being able to live in town, near restaurants, near services, near their job, ideally. It's not for everyone, but it's giving those choices.
And it is the biggest opportunity to create deed restricted housing. We have a very suburban parking standard. We have excess available on-street spaces, even in the winter. Not on every street, but I will guarantee you on the majority of the streets.
Just from the experience at my block, there are 5 short-term rentals on my block, and they rarely show up with 2 vehicles.
Absolutely.
They frequently show up with 5 or 6. And they don't understand the winter parking rules. They're kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
So
so the way that
question
works
is like,
where
where
if you're an STR, you're required to accommodate the zoning parking requirements. The neighborhood permit program, they wouldn't be allowed to park on street. Right now, we have no management of parking except on Maroon and Sopris and over at TO and Butte. And so the neighborhood permit program would handle the STRs.
Have any of you guys worked on projects or had clients who like parking was something that came up of like, I'd love to do an ADU, but can't fit it with parking? Like, have you guys seen that come up?
Yeah, there was a project in Skyland where the clients were, and it's not in town, but it's just a local reference that the clients in Skyland wanted to build an ADU, but we couldn't because we needed to provide a garage space for it. And it just shot the project. So that's, not apples and oranges, but
It's really hard to not be able to find the space, whether it's legitimate space, is it in a snow shed zone,
Mhm.
starts to create some issues. not being able to get it approved on the front of the property, sometimes becomes an issue. Just had a neighbor suggest that we put parking on the front of project, and that was approved by Bozar. So having a little bit more flexibility there as we're trying to, encourage people to do ADUs, you start having a challenge for producing 4 parking spaces, plus an enclosed garage, plus all the room that the ADU takes up, plus the footprint of the house. You start running out of space, and
Right.
Mass and scale is something that's gonna be a big talking point at a Bozar meeting that we have tomorrow night. So it is something, it goes all along with this. I have a challenge with doing this and having somebody move into the unit and say that they're only gonna have 1 car, and they only have 1 car, and then they sell the unit to somebody who has 4 cars and a trailer and a snowmobile and, all that stuff. It becomes challenging down the road to box yourself in like that. But housing's more important than parking in this town right now, so, finding a way to deal with it. Don't move into that apartment if you can't fit all your vehicles, right? Find something
And
different,
this isn't, again, mandatory, it's owner choice.
Yeah.
right? But a regional one, right? And that's where it kind of.
The buyer beware.
It's a hard thing. It will never be precise. Like, we don't know if someone will live in with 1 car, no cars, or 3 trailers and that's, but it's about providing those choices and those options and knowing we do have capacity on street to absorb it. Of course, a permit program would make it easier to manage, especially in those more busy parts of town. But that's the challenge. It'll never be
Can we
precise.
give you exact benefits as you go into the neighborhood example? So this was just a general comment. Again, it's not a blanket. It's site specific, corridor or street specific where we have excess street parking. As for the commercial areas, we're not actually recommending changing the commercial requirements. But we are going to recommend updating the payment in lieu. The cost of 13,000 is not the cost of a parking space, so that needs to be reevaluated. And similarly, I think that was the only thing we're doing is payment.
But to use that as a tool then to leverage, like with exemptions for deed restricted spaces and things like that. So that could be waived if you provide deed restricted housing or deed restricted commercial space and use that as another one of those tools.
And then lastly, it's kind of a big one, is sort of townwide. Suggest or recommend prohibiting underground or structured parking in town, period. To help manage the cost of construction, deal with our high groundwater table and environmental impacts. There's a nexus related to our wastewater treatment plant and how much water it has to be treated. Because it's called IUI, Derek can explain it.
And I.
I and I? It's so happy. We need to just think that through because it affects the capacity of what we can actually accommodate. But the bigger idea is to manage is try to rein in the land costs to grow more proportional to other costs rather than 3 or 4 times exceeding it. Because once you put in either a structure or more importantly, an underground parking structure, the cost of construction, the only tenants that can afford to be in there do not live in this valley. Or the businesses do not accommodate the majority of the residents in the valley. And that's probably one thing we can do to manage the pace of land costs. It's a big idea. A big idea.
Given the density of vehicles that can park in a parking structure, are you sure that's true? That the cost of a parking structure drives the cost of residing here out of the
Absolutely.
ballpark?
Absolutely.
Well, we've talked a lot about increasing mass and scale with the intention of adding deed restricted housing, which of course is critical and important and good ideas. But with all that, no matter how many parking spots you insist they have, comes a bunch of cars and much more visitors and a bunch more tourists and just the busyness and the cars and the people that come here in total. And none of this is addressing where those people park, right? We're just talking about, and I know it's a different conversation, but as we all know from being here, especially in the summertime, parking seems to be a problem and everything that we're talking about here, building out the rest of the lots that you showed in the beginning. And all the people that are gonna come visitors wise, granted, everybody that has a house has a parking spot, apparently. It doesn't seem to address a different conversation about parking, and you just are now talking about nixing any idea of a parking structure, right?
Well, the data right now says there is no parking problems. There's a parking convenience problem on Elk, but the four-way simply does not even get flexed. In the winter, it gets flexed between snow storage and skier days. That's the parking challenge on our public facilities, but not summer. In addition, the mobility study is looking at how do we activate the school's parking lot? When the roundabout goes in, it becomes accessible. The town has access to that during non-school hours or vacations. And the region is starting a corridor study to look at a park and ride at Brush Creek. The new roundabout at Brush Creek creates a space for it. And so the town and the county and the whole valley actually is looking at the entire valley. Do we create park and rides more conveniently at CV South, at Brush Creek, and in other places? So that you're absolutely right. The larger regional question about visitation is being addressed by a transportation study. But there's also the amount of growth we're talking about. We're talking about 3 extra feet and how many extra units on 6th Street corridor? Just as an example, we're not growing significantly because parking is the bigger threat. Once you put in parking, you see higher development density that is outside of the character of this town. And so keeping it surface parked will actually keep development more aligned with the physical size of this town and the long-term goals of the preservation plan and other aspects of our long-range plan.
The transportation plan really looks at comprehensively how to increase choices, leverage transit, leverage park and rides, and these other carrots and things to improve choices. But another key component that has to match that is managing that parking convenience with things like permit programs and things. Of course, we're a small town. Parking's been free and easy here for so long. We're not just gonna come out with a blanket. Everyone has to have a permit here to park now. It's very incremental and targeted in key zones right now, like Maroon and Cypress, the
I'm in one of those
areas of the
zones.
ski area.
Terrible.
Do you want to?
How was it before the permits?
Well, it was easy when my shoulder got plowed, but now I have to park in the street most of the time. For the last 6 weeks, I haven't had the shoulder plowed.
Yeah, we
And
can't get in behind the curve. It's a ball and challenge.
Too raw, or it's too icy.
It's
No,
too
too
muddy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah. Well, so we increased the parking with permits for the skiers to go down to park on Butte, but there's no parking space available on Butte. Because all the skiers are.
Yeah,
So
that's a baby step one.
the rollout
Yeah,
of that was
it's a tough one.
different from Maroon and Cypress. On Maroon and Cypress, it was very much like permits for residents and employees. Where there was a lot of backlash on the skier zones. I think maybe if you read the paper, you saw months and months of editorials from men bashing it. And that led to a baby step of let's allow anyone in the county to get a permit until there's those other choices, like the regional park and rides and things. So I hear you that it's.
I think it's more worried when 6th and Butte gets done, when all that's built out, because
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot of cars coming
Yeah.
to that little block.
and
And
then,
that's why we're trying to
Between
create
7th
seven
and
streets for the residents and not the skiers.
yeah,
But you're exactly
Sure,
right.
yeah, that would,
But the baby step is as the roundabout gets built, the town could then on powder days employ the school district. And Mountain Express, the school district parking, the Mountain Express can serve it. Mountain Express long range plan, but we can't get to the school district until the roundabouts.
right,
It's built.
no, I agree.
And same with Brush Creek. So it's really a baby step to addressing that issue. Because there really is an alternative for our county residents to park. Vale has really, and the Mountain aren't doing anything for parking. And the town is sort of burdening, using our neighborhoods for the benefit of Vale.
Yeah,
And so it's this balance of how do you strike that balance? So it's really a baby step.
so in the mix of all this, the commercial and residential, my observations, because of working on the Princess over the last year. Parking requirements for a large restaurant to bring people in and out. Yes, some of it is managed through parking down the street and walking up or walking from your house, but the visitors are a big deal. I don't think that's as much of the issue as then there's a residential alley for people to work and park from, and that's, I think, who's getting a little stymied in the alleys where there's a residence above a commercial property.
Mm.
And those get eaten up on accident, and then it becomes a whole big mess of the convoluted commercial to residential parking problem. I think that's gotta be,
Right.
I'm not giving you an answer in this moment, but I'm thinking that needs a lot more.
So we can look to our peers and see what they've done. Right, Aspen's allowed underground parking and structured parking, so is Breck, so has Telluride. And is that what you want? Right, from a physical form perspective, in a large structure at the four-way, underground parking, it creates a reality that is, I would argue, is not the physical character of this town.
Well, depends on how it's treated, I guess. Anymore, theme parks do a great job of putting facades on them to make them look like a historic town and then park behind them.
Yeah,
Really?
We don't want to get theme park. Really.
Do we?
They do a great job at it.
Are we, we're not far off.
But with pricing and all that, and we have seasonality, we don't have the Denver market within an hour.
True.
Bracket.
Yeah.
So how do we pay
We have
for a
a
$15
huge-
million parking
huge gap.
structure?
Yeah.
How do we do that? Only adding one floor would be $15 million to the four-way. And we have April, May, October, November, that parking lot would, and it doesn't fill up in the summer either. If you look at the data,
Yeah.
it's crazy. It'll
But
never pay for it.
the numbers that certainly don't make sense now,
No.
but 10 years from
We're
now.
not there.
Yeah, we got a lot
Coming.
of, with
This is-
coming.
This is advanced thinking for a problem that's still evolving.
And the
I knew
data,
somebody was gonna say about my theme park
says
comment,
that
but
potentially
we're moving people in and out of here.
I lived in Telluride
Problem
for
now.
15 years. I've seen the future.
It's similar.
Yeah,
You've seen the show.
yeah, I watched them build that parking garage in Telluride. I was living there at the time.
Yeah.
I have a question that I should know the answer to, but where does, when somebody pays, when a business or a commercial project pays a
And-
fee in lieu of parking, where does that money go?
There's a line item for that, and it's bought property, for instance, like the four-way parking lot was bought with that. The First and Elk parking lot was bought with that money. Then I think we've used it to like pave parking lots as well, so to like do maintenance and repairs and stuff like that too.
All parking related stuff.
So
For transportation.
little parking
Yeah.
lots that get you 7 parking spaces here
Exactly.
and 50
Right.
right there.
Right.
I think there's, to say that you've seen the future in Telluride, I don't wanna become Telluride.
I don't want to become
Yeah.
Telluride.
So
Seen it though, yeah.
how,
Become a-
how far do you go down the inconvenience road where people are like, I'm just not going back to Crested Butte, they're gonna find a parking space? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe
Yeah.
If they can't figure out how to ride their bike to the bus station to take the bus into town, they don't have what it takes to get their Crested Butte button, right? I don't know if that's the way. I like the park and ride. Get out of town, right? Get out of town, park your car, take the bus, or drop yourself off at your condo, go out of town, park, and take the bus into town and always just live on the bus. And maybe that's that way. We're a small enough town with a good enough and adaptable enough transportation service that I think we can continue to go that way. I just don't know. The park and ride has, to activate that, it's gotta cost something to park in town. Otherwise, people are gonna sit in their car, smoke a cigarette, and
Right.
drive around the block 14 times, listening to AC/DC or whatever they listen to while they look for a parking spot to unload, right? And that's bad for the environment, right? And it has to be sort of not what we think the human condition is gonna do, but in reality, what it's going to
Right.
do. The worst thing would be to try to institute a park and ride and 14 cars park in a 800 car lot, and people just ridicule us for, So I don't know if you're considering a parking pass in town, right? How do we go about that? It's gonna piss people off, but once people get used to, local pays $100 a year to have a parking pass, that they can park anywhere in town that they want. When you come into town, if you're going to park for 1 minute in one spot, But one day a year, you need to have a parking pass, whether it's a daily pass, a weekly pass, a monthly pass, or a yearly pass. I don't know. I'm playing the devil's advocate a little bit here.
That's the future. So as so what, the first parking challenge was elk. Right? And right now, we have no paid parking. We just actually enforce the 2-hour parking that had been required since the dawn of time. Right? Baby step is actually enforce your 2 hours. Next is then start to require paid parking. Right? It's where is the problem and what is the problem? So you incrementally get to that paid parking. It's incredibly inequitable. People from Texas and Oklahoma will gladly pay it in a heartbeat. So how do you do that when the problem's there? And right now, we don't have a problem big enough to warrant paid parking. It's coming. It's just not coming now, right? And so it's parking management is a growth. The next problem we're facing besides elk is the skier park, right? It'll slowly grow to, I think, Andrew, you are describing a future that is a real possibility.
And it goes hand in hand with this of the permit program and leveraging and using those on-street spaces for the residents. We can get more people in town so they don't have to drive in from out of town.
Right.
But then managing the tourists and visitors of like, yeah, you actually can't park here. You have to have a permit or it's time limited. Otherwise, there's the 4-way, there's the Brush Creek lot, there's these other choices, and there's transit. So. Let's move on to the next. I'm sure parking will continue to always come up in the different areas.
Corey, what's the amount of parking spaces we have in town, or million, like on, that are off?
It's like 2,500.
thought.
We actually have more on-street
2,500 parking
spaces than
spaces.
off-street spaces in the.
Readily available.
Yeah, and yes, in the winter, but you know, we make it work.
1,200 cars over here.
They're on site.
That's on street.
So we'll talk about on site versus not on site.
Yeah,
So
most of the stuff in town, I see everybody park in the street, or, or right
Because they
outside the
can.
house. Right in front of the house.
but you know, we're required to have parking spots designated on the property.
Correct.
So that's what I'm talking about, off the
I
property.
know, it's hard, like,
2,500.
I have 5 cars. I have 3 kids with cars when they're home in the summer. It is brutal. I'd like to park them out of town. I am a problem. I'd like to park them out of town and make them walk to town all the time.
I have, and
That's a park on
that's-
pavement.
SDR
Yeah,
right across
right.
the street from my house, and the past week, it's just been like, oh, where am I gonna park?
But Jim, it's the tragedy of the commons. Right now, you can accommodate it. Right?
Yeah,
10 years,
clearly.
but a lot better now than you can in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And so there is. when
Luckily, I don't
think
have
of
to in
Parking,
winter.
it's not black and white. It's incredibly gray and it's incredibly nuanced. And so be site specific, be street specific, how you grow and manage it, because it is a problem you manage. There is no silver bullet.
And just one last observation about parking that came to me that was a real realization was the anthracite place that's next to the grocery store
Yeah.
is required to have 1.5 spaces per unit. So they have 30 units, 45 spaces. We typically see that parking lot pretty empty, like it's not really being utilized. So 1.5 spaces as a requirement probably was too much, is what I think we're learning from that project.
I think that's a demographic situation that's unique. I mean, an anthracite place, if your girlfriend moves in, you get kicked out of your apartment because you make too much money as a couple. So like one parking space per deed restricted unit, if it's that restrictive on your income level, then that makes a lot of sense. But the reality is that a lot of the housing in town is incredibly expensive, owned and occupied by wealthy people, wealthy visitors with numerous vehicles. So I would, 1.5 spots per unit on my block be really insufficient. I mean, there's families on my block with, like you said, 5 vehicles, and then their friends, kids' friends come over and there's just like sloppy parking and short-term rentals. It's like, I think that the demographic needs to be paid attention to. I mean, 1 spot per unit makes a whole lot of sense.
Remember, these incentives are for the creation of deed restricted housing.
Yeah, so for that deed restricted inventory, 1 spot makes a lot of sense, but if that's an ADU on the back of a mansion.
Right.
I mean, is that 3 total spots?
So should we just give up and say, go ahead, park your 5 cars everywhere? No, this is a real question. You guys are bringing up, oh, it's inconvenient. Crested Butte is going down a path of accommodating 5 cars per house, that suddenly Crested Butte will not be Crested Butte. We hear a lot of citizens, the number one concern in the transportation plan was pedestrian safety. There's too many cars. That was the number one concern. So you have to decide a future. And how do you go there? Do you just simply say, okay, we give up, do whatever you want?
No, I agree, but if you're gonna engineer a community which has less cars, you need to have somewhere for them to go, like the overflow or the sort of the park and ride. You know, there's, people show up with the cars.
Right.
So like, I'm all for having a
Okay.
community where I can walk around and ride a bike and not worry about getting swept off of it by a vehicle. But you have to engineer that community. It's not just a matter of saying,
Right.
we don't require the parking, therefore the cars go away.
No, there's a lot more to the planning. You're right. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
And as we said, like it's all of it's transit, it's parking rights, it's all of these things, it's permits, but we do actually have more on-street spaces than off-street. We have the ability to absorb that. Yes, your block is probably harder than mine, probably different from Jim's and Andrew's, but how can we look at that as a way to leverage? But that is a trade-off of there would be more cars parked on-street than off-street. But it would be incremental. We have a lot of development potential in the town, but we're also a lot built out. So it'd be future houses, you know, they might be parking on street, but it wouldn't take away your parking where you now have to park all of your 5 cars on street.
If I bought,
You'll still be under parked, Jim.
Thankfully, my kids are out of college, so they're not here all the time. But when they're here, it's just a
Yeah,
lot.
you never engineer the 100%, July 4th, when all your kids are here. Make it, oh,
And when I hear
it's
engineering,
convenient,
we're
right?
engineering this community to be a park and ride suburban community, just as much as you're fearing us engineering it to be what Crested Butte is today. Both of it is engineering. We're regulating more parking right now than what the town's character provides. We're social engineering no matter what we do. That's what architects and planners do. So,
if I bought a 4-bedroom or rented a 4-bedroom house in Crested Butte under this permitting plan, and I know it's not a plan currently, but if there was, how many permits would I get? Parking permits would I get?
well, how many would you be able to park?
Two spaces for a 4-bedroom house.
So you get 2 parking,
I think
Right.
that's.
Right,
Permits.
we let you have as many permits as you want for free.
yeah, so if I bought a house in the town of Crested Butte, that's a 4-bedroom, I would only get 2 parking spots?
No, right now,
I mean, I'm talking about
You
currently,
can have
yes.
as many
It will
permits as
change.
you want for
it
free.
will tighten up as demand happens, but right now. And so it just, as the demand for the street goes, we probably won't give you 4 parking spaces.
And so in that situation, and Andrew, what you're talking about is if I rent a house and I live out of town and me and my kids who all live in different towns and we're gonna meet in Crested Butte, which means we're all driving here. And we're gonna rent a short-term rental, I guess. And maybe there's 3 or 4 of us meeting there and we all have cars, we're gonna get two passes. And so the other 2 are gonna have to say, hey, those cars are gonna have to go in the park and ride.
An STR right now wouldn't get a pass.
So I'm talking about this conversation we're having. I know right now we don't have a plan for
Well,
that.
an STR will not get it. I'm telling you, they don't get it now, they won't get it in the future. They can park on the site. Maybe the people who come to Crested Butte carpool, maybe they choose to leave a car at a park and ride lot, but they wouldn't be allowed to park on street. They only would be allowed to park
Garage or
on
driveway.
site.
Yeah.
If you're a vacation renter.
So if I, really?
Residence is
Park
different.
just on the road like everybody else can?
Not in the,
Not
not in the
permit
permit zones. On the other streets you can, but not in the
With
permit.
the idea of it's a licensed use, they have to provide the parking to meet that use.
Otherwise you don't get it.
So where did they go? Just out of curiosity right now.
In front of Andrew's house.
Well, right now,
Not CB.
not CB, anyone who has more cars in it, because they don't have on-street parking, they come and park in town.
We're.
Do we want to be the parking lot for them?
No.
No, but I mean, right now, if I rent a house on Sopris, I don't know where the permit areas are, but if I rent a house and I only get 1 car, where do my other 2 cars go or whatever? When I'm here for a
You could
week.
go over to TO, you could go to.
So you park in town, you just go somewhere else, off the, yeah.
We haven't heard many
A block
complaints
away.
about the STR
Yeah.
issue. We've more heard
I get it
CB
now.
being underparked and
Outside of that zone.
coming
Yeah.
to town. Yeah. Anyways, let's move on to, so let's start talking about ADUs and micro lots. I'll turn over to Jesse to talk about our neighborhoods.
Yeah, so this refers to the areas of stability, which Mel showed a map a couple slides ago, which were the areas in pink. So it refers to the areas, for instance, in all the residential neighborhoods around town, and then also the historic core. So both residential and a commercial core down B1 and Elk Avenue. These areas, it was under the, not the assumption, but in the research that was done by the consultants and town staff, a lot of these lots are fairly built out. There isn't a lot of development potential other than an ADU here, an ADU there, adding on to a house maybe. So, and these are also our historic core areas where we want to protect the character of those districts as well. And so some of the suggestions for these areas pertaining to land use are, the ideas would be, we've heard from people, I would do an ADU that was long-term rental if I had the ability to do an ADU myself that I could use however I wanted it to. So is that another option where one is deed restricted and one is not deed restricted? Another idea that has come up through the plan, and I think this is actually Kent's suggestion maybe, but looking at micro lots, subdividing off. Right now within our code, when you do an ADU, it has to be in concert with a primary building and owned by the same owner. But one of the ideas through this plan it's been looking at is, could this enable someone to buy a lot in town that might never have been able to buy a lot if in some way that were deed restricted on the rear of that lot? The owner says, yeah, I'd love to do an ADU, but I just don't have the funds, or I really don't want to do it, but I want to enable someone else to do it. So that's another idea for that. We'd have to look at that through the code. Yeah, Andrew.
I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
I love the idea. I think it's a great concept that people that are buying properties in town have so much money that to sell off a piece of their, and I'm just being devil's advocate here, to sell off a corner of their lot, to have somebody that they don't no longer have control of living in their lot. It sounds like a little bit of a pipe dream to me, although I love the concept
What
of
if,
being able to buy a little piece of my heaven and build a 700 square foot.
what if you're one of
ADU.
you guys, right? What if John Hess, or if you only had a single unit on your property and not the high end? Is that an income opportunity for them? Because you've described some parts. There's other ownership, right? And again, it's really hard not to go to black and white,
Right.
but start to lay that quilt down because the policies are more nuanced and more surgical in intention. We're not going to be able to deal with the $4 million lot very well. And the new construction, Jesse's proposal, maybe in the newer parts, maybe up here off the Tio and Gothic, is can we give them allowances to have a private ADU in exchange for a public deed restricted ADU and their primary? Because we're not getting as many ADUs built.
Right.
If I'm an older lot owned by a long timer that still is here, but I need income, can they sell off the back half of their lot? Right, so trying to be more nuanced.
Yeah, and I think there probably would be some bites on that, you know,
Mhm.
it's looking at, like you said, there's not a silver bullet, you know, it's looking at different ways of potentially, you know, achieving that. And then it comes down to how do you figure it out? Two separate, with separations between them becomes hard, you know, allowing them to be party walled and, you know.
Right.
Like a duplex in the back of your lot with 2 500 square foot
Yeah.
units.
It's like this model shows different
Exactly.
configurations.
You'd have to allow some pretty cool architecture.
And considering flat roof.
You
potentially
considering
on
it?
ADU.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think it has to be
The
considered.
next area, under density and fit, for instance, would be relaxed setbacks. We
Yeah.
understand that you can't relax them to the sides because there has to be snow storage. If it's going onto other people's property, that creates problems. But does the rear really need to be 5 or 10 feet? Does the front yard need to be 20 feet? Are those areas we could look at varying in certain circumstances?
Or because of the preservation plan, outside of the historic district and the new recreational era, can we play with roof?
Exactly.
And so that we don't have a side setback, and these are the newer parts of town. Right, and that's the nice thing about the preservation plan, is it creates probably almost half of the town has far more design flexibility because of the preservation plan than what current regulations allow. And so maybe this doesn't happen in a historic district because the site can't accommodate because we require roof pitch.
Right.
In the newer parts, we won't require roof pitch going forward.
Still have to shovel the
Good.
roof and the snow has to go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
There you go. But it's just a different challenge.
Right. I'd do some more research on that because insurance companies are starting not to insure anything with flat roofs.
Oh, yeah.
And I would hate to hamstring an ADU or a affordable
Unit.
project with not even be able to insure it.
A shallow shed roof, shed roofs can do, if you could just put.
Hide it behind a parapet, something.
But if it's shedding, then you have a tough time relaxing setbacks.
Right.
If you're putting that snow in one
Any-
place though.
Any less than a 5-foot setback and you can't have non-protected window openings, so how livable does it become?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's,
Yeah.
These are all things we need to look at, so.
And that is also a taming of the growth fears. Right? There's only gonna be so many lots that can accommodate this. This isn't a pro-growth strategy. It's much more surgical. And how do we manage the expansion of the economy and keep our character? Because every house we put in here, especially deed restricted house, is gonna just fuel employment. And so we're not trying to build 1,000 units. We're trying to salt and pepper units in to sort of match our character, so our current restaurants can at least be employed.
Well, yeah, as these smaller spaces become available, you just have to be much more flexible on the design guidelines so they can achieve these designs.
And that's one thing we've heard from a few folks is the support for the idea of more density, but being cautious in the historic core zones, just because the character is so important in those areas. We do allow for 2 accessory dwellings right now in the R2C zone. Not everybody knows that, and it's sometimes hard to accommodate. And again, like Troy said, it's kind of lot by lot. Can it work here? Can it not work here? But it goes along with the historic character to have lots of little buildings on the back of the lot, because that's what the miners did. They needed a smoke shack, so they put one up. They needed an outhouse, so they put one up. And so this is talking about different buildings for different purposes, but going along with that. Yeah,
So when there's 2 ADUs on a property, one must be a long-term rental, what is the other one?
well, that's what I was saying, that this plan contemplates the idea of, could one be a long-term rental deed restricted as it is now? And then does the community support the idea of the other one being for the owner's use? So grandma comes, she can stay there, however they want to use that.
One of Jim's kids.
One is,
Okay.
It's kind of going hand in hand with that. One of the things I've been contemplating and receive some input here is potentially making the minimum size for a unit 350 square feet instead of 400. So we could start to fit these things in inside our existing FAR without having to be like, oh, we have to make our FAR bigger to get more stuff in. And I think 350 square feet is close to 400 and wouldn't totally dramatically affect the livability of that unit. But it would allow it to fit better in our town.
The main premise here is get the market to help more.
You don't have to agree
Right,
with
we're
me.
seeing ADUs.
Well, then we don't get all the units in.
And is there what type of incentives do you see owners wanting? From a regulatory perspective, this is our opportunity.
More livable space.
So what does that
I
mean?
have almost every client, if you could give them another bedroom in an accessory dwelling unit with a shower and a cook space, that makes that, then we move towards not allowing that currently until, unless you're doing an ADU. So I think that absolutely would be a
An incentive.
Incentive, right? You gotta be careful. They don't wanna make an 800 square foot for themselves and 250 square feet for a
Right.
non-livable accessory. So you gotta play around with those numbers, I think, carefully. And then it becomes tough for parking, right? And then do you have to give breaks on parking to actually fit?
It all ties together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And with Ken's point on the reducing minimum unit size, I think it's important to think we're trying to create like a portfolio and more diverse housing stock where you might think, I would not want to live in 350 square feet, but that might fill a need of someone for a studio, maybe cheaper rent, and might be different than maybe a different ADU or a unit on Bellevue or something, or Paradise Park. It's about creating a diversity of options to meet different needs for the community.
When I moved here in my early twenties, I would have totally taken a 350 square foot.
Anything.
That Chadlington unit wasn't much bigger.
I had one and it was $80 a month. That's the target, right? That's the target?
$20 a week?
Get back to that.
I did the 3 seasons before I first moved here.
So the one thing I don't want to skip, because we talked about setbacks, I want to go back to density, because this is one where I think you can speak for some of your clients probably, and also for yourselves, but one of the discussion points in this plan is how about excluding ADU related spaces? So if you're doing an ADU, could garages and basements not count for those? Or so you're getting those within your FAR for more allowable space. But for instance, if you're not providing an ADU, then the garage space does count and you potentially can't do a basement. They're prohibited. Unless you're
changing the FAR so abatement counts against it.
A mix of carrots and sticks.
Interesting.
What do you guys think?
I mean, I like it, but I also don't like telling people what to do with their property.
we do.
Yeah, I know. You have to do it. No, I get it. No, because I'm all about it.
They can be the bad guy with this.
Yeah, again, that's what it's come to. No, I like it because and then circling back around to Ken's point, a variety of spaces is good. The small spaces are tough because people, even if they can live simply, we just have junk, we just have stuff. It's like the stuff, where do you put the stuff out? You gotta put it somewhere. But, yeah, I do like that idea. I don't like the idea, when I moved back here, you guys you weren't allowing people to like build out kitchens and bathrooms or whatever it was, and it was like, you were trying not to, it was the opposite, right? You were trying to prevent people from building out these ADUs, and now you sort of are, is that?
No, it would be incentivizing doing an ADU. So you'd get more bang for your buck if you're providing an ADU. Whereas
On
if
your
you're not-
primary residence?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
I think what you're thinking is you disincentivized and made it illegal for somebody to put in a kitchen when it's only for their use.
Correct.
That's
So
what
these people that have a 4-bedroom house,
Yeah.
they want to expand
Yeah.
eight more guests in the summertime, they have this extra.
It's a different thing.
But Jesse's a lot, considering this, what's showing is maybe we change that.
Yeah.
Right.
What I saw when I got here is I saw like viable living spaces not being built out because of that, and I felt that was weird. Does that make
Well,
sense?
the heated and plumbed accessory structures, they weren't for living at all. So it wasn't. But this would give more opportunity, more space without just saying, hey, you could have a bigger main house with keeping the character of the neighborhood.
But Andrew is right, that we tried to look at that within the zoning code to say, okay, we're gonna limit these heated buildings to 250 square feet. You can park a car in there,
Right.
but no more, oh, I have a powder room, so grandma can stay out there because we don't really have room for her in our house when she comes. Because we were hearing about like, oh boy, those get
Right.
flipped the minute they're CO'd into a bedroom.
Yeah.
So,
Not a rental.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I get it.
yeah.
So for
So you're gonna
allowing
allow the ADU.
like an ADU on a property that's for the owner's use, what's the trade-off? What does community get back from that?
Well, they'd have to do a deed
Is
restricted
required to make a
in
second,
concert with that,
Right.
yeah.
2 ADUs.
so then you do.
Because right now, all we offer is the water tap, right? And that's not enough of an incentive to produce more units. And we're not seeing a high production of ADUs, so we're thinking of what more incentives can we give?
Right. So bigger house.
Or an additional ADU that's market rate.
So almost like the heated and plumbed building.
Or a
where it's a
basement.
separate building.
How about attic space and a basement?
Hey, we could give it back.
Exactly.
That's what I was gonna ask about. So you talked about the incentives, but you also talked about the sticks, and if the sticks reducing what they can currently have. In other words, reducing the square footage or the FAR. And reduce that and then say, all right, you can have it back if you build a
Yeah.
deed restricted ADU.
Correct, and that's obviously for vacant lots or reconstruct, or new construction.
Yeah, right now.
I think we have to be really careful. So a lot of, everything we're describing here, everything, without question that we're describing, is making the free market stuff more expensive, right? So we're taking what's already really expensive. So we're eliminating a certain level of wealth for the next level of wealth. So we're kicking out the millionaires for the billionaires, kind of, to coin a phrase.
Well, they're gonna kick the millionaires out regardless, so.
Right.
Well, so you are planning for the future.
Yeah.
I don't know, to me, that part doesn't, I like the incentive side of it. To like take something back and say, all right, you guys, now you cannot have a basement and your FAR has been reduced for your primary residence unless. I mean, a lot of people want to build a house and don't want an accessory dwelling or a deed restricted or otherwise.
We still have
Most, right, but they still have the choice, but the choice has been diminished now, right? That's what you're saying?
With the,
No, because aren't you saying we're reducing
Because.
what you can build on
The
the.
choice isn't diminished, but the potential build is.
What's
One of the things-
potential build, the house that you
Yeah,
could have built
exactly.
on the lot that you just spent $1 million on or whatever.
One of the things
So I'm
that,
not in favor of
Somebody's gotta
that.
serve their dinner.
one of the things that was brought up is when someone does a basement, you don't see a lot of locals doing basements, cause they're really expensive to do.
Yeah.
To build it like a boat, you obviously know how to do that. So one of the thoughts in this is leveraging that deed restricted unit by saying, if you want a basement, here's how you can do it, but you have to provide. So I do see what you're saying,
We are
but
doing
that's thinking about just how.
But
can
we're
we-
also getting units, otherwise, the billionaires are coming. We're inviting them in faster in exchange for having local residents, right? Telluride is 25% or less full-time residency. We're at 67. We were at 85.
Yeah.
We're quickly becoming Aspen and Telluride. And so we're trying to strike that balance. So we know the billionaires are coming. And so what we want to do is use that money to help create a community. Or
I
sustain
get it.
our.
I think I would stick more for incentive rather than
Okay.
the stick approach.
Okay.
what are other thoughts on the basement idea?
I lean more towards what Mike's saying. I'm always more for incentive if possible. It's just what's the incentive? I like the idea of potentially 2 units on the back and reducing the square footage, so we don't take up all the lot to sort of say, okay, well, I have space for my family to expand in the summer, but I also have to deal with some dirty local.
Punchy.
Maybe not classes so the locals don't get involved.
I will say this, and I'm just gonna say that it has nothing to do with this, any of these policies, but the people that buy and build here, they're not the people that are serving the dinners, and that's the important point that you brought up several times. That is important. We need the workers. But in a manner of speaking, they are now our community, right? We need to embrace them more like, I'm sorry if I'm misreading this, but I kind of sense a little bit of a vibe of these rich bastards are gonna pay for our way, you know what I mean? We have to find solutions to these problems, but I think we have to be thinking of these people as our neighbors, our community, our friends. I'm friends with a lot of them because I've built a lot of their homes, right?
Yeah.
And their feelings get hurt, right? I think that's important and not to be brushed aside. When we kicked them all out at COVID, right? That had to happen, but they really felt like, oh, we're not part of their community. They don't see us as part of their community.
Yeah.
I understand all the nuance of COVID, but the reality is these are our people, right? We are choosing to stay in this community that is a very short supply. And because of that, there's very few places like this in the country that these people are going to come here and they want to come here and this has been a bucket list dream of theirs for their whole lives. They've been successful at what they do, and now they can afford to come here. And I just think we have to keep that in mind, that they're you and me, and they're just like us. They just happen to have been successful at what they do. They're coming here because they want a mountain bike and because they want to fly fish, because they want to look at the wildflowers and birds and hike on the trails and all that kind of stuff.
But it's not all for them, Mike. Like when I
I
lived
agree.
in Telluride, I saw every one of my friends get pushed out of town, every single one of them.
Well, I'm not
There was
suggesting
no
we
community
don't
left.
focus on finding affordable housing. I'm just saying that we involve them in that, we let them be a part of the conversation, we don't, give them the sense that they're kind of being penalized, they can move here if they buy a local too, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I totally hear you, and thank you for bringing that up, and I apologize if that vibe came across. We definitely, from this, aren't coming from a place of let's stick it to them, but how can we really incentivize them and direct?
There's no doubt this is a very important conversation, and it has to happen because I'm an employer, I'm
Yeah,
intimately aware of the problem. And I'm friends with all the restaurant tours and everything else around, they have it even worse, right? Because nobody wants to drive from Gunnison to work at a Crested Butte restaurant, right? They'll drive from Gunnison to work for a construction company, but
yeah.
so it's a problem and it needs to be dealt with, and these are all great approaches.
I think one thing on the idea of FAR and garage basements and things is thinking too about right now, everything is just getting maximized and maximized. And connecting to the historic preservation plan, a lot of those newer neighborhoods just look really homogeneous. And could this be a way to not only be used as an incentive and a little bit of a stick to move towards the ADU idea, but also, okay, then if you don't build an ADU, then it's gonna add a little more diversity to the block because you're not gonna have that hidden attic space, you're not gonna have the basement or something like that, and might result in a smaller home or multiple homes on the lot, kind of more in line with the historic character. So that was another kind of approach
Yeah.
behind it too.
Andrew?
So I've told this to Jesse, but I'll share the story again. One of the biggest mistakes I made in my career was about 3 years ago when you guys came up with the ADUs only needed to be rented out at 6 months at a time. Right, that was sort of what you had to quote
That's what the
unquote be
definition says.
considered a long-term rental.
Right.
Mhm.
I went to my 2 clients that I just signed up and said, hey, you guys, you can build an ADU and you only have to rent it out 6 months out of the year. And the rest of the year you can have it. And they were like, oh, great, I'll rent it out in the winter. And my family can come in the summer and I have this great ADU. And after this, homes were approved and all ready to go, I found out that was not the case. And so I apologize to my clients and they both were very understanding. But I got traction on 2 out of 2 of my clients at the time that thought that they could rent out their house for 6 months out of the year. And they could see that as, oh, okay, during the winter, I'll house a local. And in the summer, we'll have a grand old party in my back house. So that's just food for thought.
Yeah,
It
that's good.
was supremely, turning of that tide of doing it. And my guess would be if they were forced to do it 6 months out of the year, half of them, after renting and finding the greatest tenant for 6 months out of the year, would turn it into a 12-month out of the year, just because
Right.
they wanted to. And they'd still have the option of kicking that tenant out and having it for their friends. And so I think that's like Mike is talking, that's something that they'd be like, oh, okay, I understand. Let's try to be part of the solution, but also give myself somewhere to expand during the season, my family or something. And that's my comment of
I think we're gonna work for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on ADUs? We'll move on to the next area. And all this stuff too, you can keep thinking on, give us more feedback after the meeting. I know there's a lot to talk about here. Anything else on this one?
Yeah, the more I think about it, if the house is empty and the ADU is occupied, that would start to give life to the town and keep people in town. So yeah, the more you think about it, the more you could do to incentivize people to rent one or half of their ADUs would be a really good idea. Because when I just lived on that alley in Telluride, I owned affordable housing in Telluride for 11 years. So I experienced owning affordable housing, and then I was back into the rental market and I just lived on a dead alley. I mean, the only people that kept me company were the bears at night. And it was really sad. It was really sad that I was the only person that lived on my block and the other houses were just empty. And, you know, maybe come back here, but I wouldn't want to see that in this town, just a dead town where it's just vacation homes.
Right.
And those people have to drive, and the service workers in Telluride drive from Montrose.
Right.
Which is insane
In Telluride,
to Telluride.
and here more,
Right
well,
here,
yeah.
Montrose.
Right.
It's
it's
brutal.
tough, very tough, yeah. I remember a time, I know you wanna move on, but I remember a time when the town started to enforce rules about renting ADUs. We happened to be working on a house up on the bench that had an ADU, and I don't remember the details, but they were gonna try and force, the town wanted to enforce and insist that them and a couple others rented out their ADU long-term. And maybe it was in the original building permit regulations or something. I don't remember exactly how it was, but there was a lawsuit that ensued with somebody, with not my client, but somebody else. And I think that somehow there was some sort of like payment in lieu was a part of the resolution, wasn't there?
It wasn't like a payment in lieu, but it settled, but it's just a symptom of over time. Restrictive covenants, deed restrictions, they get better. We learn from.
Right, yeah, no, I get that, I totally get that, but what it made me think of is that you're also funding, or at least currently funding, affordable housing projects around town, around the valley. Would it make sense to talk about a fee in lieu of the long-term rental? In other words, if somebody wanted to build an ADU, but they absolutely did not want to rent it out, but they were willing to pay $500,000 for that could go towards a
Parking garage.
Telluride,
That's just lit up.
Jonathan, Telluride has where you can buy yourself out of the deed restriction, can't you?
I don't remember, but that actually does sound,
I believe they do.
Vail did.
yeah.
I don't know, I'm not saying it's a good idea, it's just a thought that came to mind,
Is
Do
it,
you have ROA?
is it like
right
parking? Like they want,
kind of,
they would pay a payment, a big
a
payment,
big payment.
$500,000
Or whatever.
to have an ADU in their backyard that they can use, so
Right.
they don't have to build an ADU for an affordable housing unit.
The housing unit for $500,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we.
Well, I was just making up numbers, I mean, whatever that number is.
We need about 780, what I
Land
remember,
and
is our
construction.
smallest unit. We need a lot more than 500.
Well, I mean, it would go in a fund that is late, gonna go towards, mineral point or whatever.
We do have.
Type project.
Which is housing impact fee that calculates by jobs created, how much housing you need to provide, and then how much of that do you need to mitigate. So right now, everyone is charged that, but if you build an ADU, you're waived from that. So we essentially have a version, but the cost of that's not prohibitive.
But I think what you're describing is there's already one on your lot and you're like, someone before me did this and I don't know that I really want that on my lot. Would
Well,
there be?
that was the example I started with, but now I'm thinking in new
Yeah.
home construction.
Okay,
I bought a lot, I'm gonna build a house, and I'd really like to have a ADU in the back because I've got a great big family, and if we all show up and the grandkids and everybody, we need extra space. We've got all the money in the world. I'm willing to pay the $5 million for the house and the $2 million to build the guest house, and I'll pitch in $500,000 to the town to put towards their housing fund,
you
right?
can't do that right
Replacing the
now, but
millionaires
that's
with
a
the
good.
billionaires.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Another
That's
way,
more of a
another way
carrot,
to
though.
go.
You feel that. you're not
It's just yeah.
Well, that's the thing too, that it comes to the second or third generation of owner that might end up renting it out. So it's there to have an opportunity to rent it out. They
That's
might
right,
be
it may
more
come back
inclined to.
around to the
So if you
rental market.
prohibit it, then it never exists in the first place.
Right.
I mean, again, going back to the point of this plan was we can't keep up, we can't build enough housing, we do not have anywhere near the amount of funding to do that, nor the land. So do we wanna risk losing what we have, the ADUs in our neighborhoods to then take it and be able to build units, or do we wanna really incentivize folks to help us build more ADUs and have people in our
And one of the
neighborhoods?
benefits of that community is diversity that has throughout town and not, that's where they live. Right, we want to create a community of different products, different housing types mixed throughout.
Yes.
That's what a community is.
Yeah.
I like the half lot option too. I think that's it.
The micro,
I love the O'Neills. That's the half lot back there and their place is awesome.
yeah.
I think we should do more of that.
All right, let's move on to Bellevue. So All of the neighborhoods in the historic core, as Jesse said, we're referring to as our areas of change. We identified Bellevue, Sixth Street, and the Slate River annexation as areas of stability. We identified Bellevue, Sixth, and the Slate River annexation as our areas of change. Lots of development potential or redevelopment potential, and could we envision kind of a new vision for these areas and bring more mixed use and vibrancy to these areas? So with Bellevue, what we're looking at is really maintaining the focus on light industrial commercial development, especially on the ground floor, not making it like a second Oak Avenue or something like that, really keeping it the commercial zone, but adding more residential. Right now it is limited, maximum 3 units per parcel, up to 50%. So looking at, can we increase residential mixed use density there? For fit, these are where some of those performance bonuses really come in on Bellevue, considering a 4th story. We heard from a lot of folks, if you're gonna do extra height, Bellevue is the place to do it. Reducing parking and also setbacks, but then also tying it back to our transportation plan, setting up this corridor through our zoning for improved pedestrian connectivity, moving towards more on-street parallel parking, less of that head-in front parking to businesses and things, still having that parking for the commercial businesses, but setting that corridor up in the future. One piece of feedback I'll add here that we heard last week that I thought was great is right now through these renderings and models, it just kind of looks like a wall of added height, but could it be more nuanced? Like a portion of the building could be a 4th story and through our design standards and things like that. So it's not just adding this huge wall. And of course, it would be parcel by parcel incremental future development going forward. So what are some reactions to Bellevue?
I like it.
Is there a study on how that impacts the bench views from up the houses on Journey's End?
We could.
If there was a
look at
4th,
I
that.
can't imagine they would be that tall.
I don't
would they?
think it would go above the
4th story.
bench.
Yeah, I don't think it would. I mean, I'm just kind of visualizing. I don't
Probably
know. Yeah, I don't think so.
We have this model here, we have it like for the whole town. I could show you that, and we could look at some different.
How tall is a 4-story building, Andrew?
40 feet.
40 feet. How tall is the ice rink at the peak?
55, 60.
Yeah, it's
Is it
big.
really?
Yeah.
6 stories tall? I wouldn't have thought that.
Well, we can find that out for you guys.
Achievers.
Well, it just might be a good
42,
reference.
So.
fire
Achievers is
district.
42
Hmm.
feet tall.
The fire district's 35 feet. But it has no step backs. It is up on the street. There is no relief to the height, but it is, and that was confirmed with the fire district, that it is 35 feet.
In this district, I don't think we were concerned about, the impacts that the houses from the bench have looking down onto the town. It's more like what the town residents experience looking out. And one of the reasons we thought 4 floors might be appropriate on the south side of the street is because it kind of backs up to the bench. And you're not blocking anything behind it. You're kind of backing up to something that's already massive. So that if any of the spots in town, this might lend itself to
You meant
allow
the south side of the
just on
street.
that side of the street. That was the,
The south side, backing up the bench, okay.
Yeah.
On the bottom picture.
That was kind of where
Right, yeah.
the group kind of rationalized into that idea of 4th
Am I
floor.
looking east
This
or
is
am I
gonna
looking
be-
west?
You're looking west.
So
towards-
right, the
Views
bottom
and all
picture is
that.
looking east.
This is looking east.
So that's the bench that I'm seeing there. Oh,
It's looking west.
Right.
That's what is that right there?
That was the old CB Electric building next.
Okay.
You're looking towards the Nordic Center.
okay. I was seeing that as the view, but that's the bench, okay. Yeah, I think that's density, I think that's a part of town that people would live with it, right? If it's fairly undeveloped right now, and most of the people that are over there are just in commercial, and they probably don't mind having extra density in that area. It's closer to the exit of town, so you don't get a ton of
Isn't that
people
traffic
driving through
hazard?
town to get to it.
Right.
You have some issues with snow on the street. I probably wouldn't want to consider a whole lot of sloped roof
We talked. to the
buildings that drip and they'd have to hold the
consultant,
snow, and
yeah,
I'm
about
not a
that.
crazy fan of that.
The design could definitely be
Generally,
better.
So the trade-off there is you allow a 4th story on the south side of Bellevue and that top floor is housing, or the top 2 floors housing, or?
So we would give an incentive of you could have that 4-story reduced parking. In exchange, we would require, say, like 20% of the development needs to be deed restricted housing or commercial. So it could be a
mix.
negotiation.
It's mixed use.
Mix of market and
Yeah.
restricted.
It would be a
If they chose, if they chose to put an office up there and housing on the middle floors,
Yeah.
that would certainly be an opportunity, but
Yeah.
the idea is,
It
can
would be a
we,
percentage of the building.
the
Yeah.
market is for market rate housing, that's what the market wants. And so can we get 20% of those to be deed restricted?
That'd be
I
great.
want to stop at 20.
No, we don't know the number yet, that's a
We would
good
do
question.
Market study to see what.
That's
would
a
be
good
viable.
question.
Yeah.
5th floor.
That's a great
One more
question.
floor on is at 33%.
Right.
Numbers are.
You have to do a pro forma to,
Yeah.
you know, make sure that it's still feasible project.
The idea is this would be a performance base that the applicant would then go to the community development director or the town manager and show the performance, calculate, we have a base of 20%. If they couldn't yield that, they would have to demonstrate.
Be like a negotiation.
Right.
What is, does anybody have any idea if Alpine Lumber's planning on moving out of town still? That's what I've heard. They've been talking
A
about.
different,
Yeah, it's a different, from
company?
builders first, I think.
Yeah.
But they have property in the Whetstone Industrial Park.
Yeah.
And I know that previously they were talking about moving there. I don't know if that's still
Still
talking
talking.
about.
that was their
I've heard
intention.
Still talking.
Yeah,
So this was a study on Alpine lumber recognizing it's probably a
Good
candidate
job,
for
market, yeah,
redevelopment.
right.
Given it's like kind of under what it could be.
I think eventually that lumberyard's going.
Well, the reason why I was asking is because what's the
Hey
definition?
guys, this is Ben. Yeah, the Alpine Lumber guys are planning on moving to Whetstone Industrial Park.
Good to hear. As far, I mean, so we're calling it light industrial. And that certainly, but I don't, what's the industrial part that's allowed? Currently a lumberyard is allowed there, of course.
Some of the industrial parts that they aren't allowed on Elk Avenue, for instance, are the welding shops,
Yeah.
the auto repair shops. You can do like a coffee, you can produce coffee back there. You could do like the breweries back there.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
can't have a tap room currently, but they can produce the beer. That's the light industrial part of it. Things that might,
I like the idea of just making it mixed use and let there be restaurants and apartments and let people roast coffee and brew beer and probably not permit any more lumber yards, right? Obviously, if you're there, but we do have an industrial park for that kind of stuff.
So I think it's important to keep that in mind as we'll go next to 6 to think of, do we want to retain commercial uses in town? Or do we want to just say, hey, let's just have kind of more restaurants, retail that in town, where through our advisory committee conversations, we thought about, we really want to keep that portion of town to have that option to do the welding shop, to do those things, but 6th Street could really be an opportunity to be that extension of Elk Avenue of more, you have more drive-by traffic.
And encourage more housing and mixed use in that
And we-
part of it, right?
It's very similar, just with different land uses, going back to those dials of
Right.
land use, looking at the land use bar a little differently for Bellevue than for 6th Street. But we have heard mixed feedback. Some folks are like, keep it commercial. Some folks are like, turn Bellevue into Elk Avenue. So it's mixed.
At one point I
feedback
had this, when, this was several years ago now, but there was a conversation about, well, when we were talking about Elk Avenue being one way or, you know, and they, in the summer, I think we still let restaurants put some seats out there and stuff like that. It just seems so obvious to me. This is while they were talking about building the ice rink. That we could be one way up Elk Avenue, down 2nd Street, connect to Bellevue and just kind of make it this big one-way loop that would just be the whole, you know, what we're talking about.
COVID. The one way, I'm just kidding.
I don't mean to bring
Where the
up.
bikes go. They all want to go the other way.
Bikes want to go both ways.
Right. No, I get it. It really, for me, it had more to do with parking, right? Because it seems, well, right now, everybody goes up to the end of Elk Avenue and does a U-turn and back and 2 3-point turn and then back down Elk Avenue the other way. It's,
Yeah.
So again, it's what is the future?
right.
What do you want? And the town intentionally said Bellevue's gonna be commercial. We don't want the high-end retail and restaurants over there. The zoning dictates the market. We want that on Elk and Sixth Street.
Yeah,
And we don't want it diluted throughout the town because they will price that out. And we want employment or commercial entities in town. And so how do you create a complete community?
yeah,
And so the idea of Elk Avenue in Bellevue has historically never been a part of the town's vision.
sure.
And so that you're presenting something completely counter to what the town has been doing up to this point.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's wrong, I just want to at least present that.
Yeah, no, I get it, and that made sense for a bunch of years. The question is, does it still make sense?
And is there a great middle ground, right? You
Right.
have a restaurant, but it's more like a bakery with 2 seats or something like that.
Right.
Take out time, gravity kind of stuff.
Something to.
Because it would be nice to be vibrant, the more people that are over there, so everybody have to
And
go into town.
we could do that by limiting floor plate sizes too.
Sure.
Like, and so the smaller the space, it starts to create logic for that use,
Yeah.
right?
Or looking at our food truck regulations, could we have more than Big Mine or things like that, you know? Could be a.
Or just limited food service versus restaurants.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna move into Sixth Street, but I think this is gonna dovetail into that. Underground parking, it could be a good idea in these locations where you have, to put underground parking in a 50 by 125 foot lot doesn't make much sense because half of it's ingress and half of it's egress and you get 14 spaces under a whole lot. Whereas these, if you could go under 6 consecutive lots, your percentage of ingress and egress becomes a lot less and you get a much better density. And then you can potentially build out the footprint of the building and get incentives there if you can provide more parking on site.
So if we did the underground parking as a performance in exchange for deed restricted, we'll let you do it.
Sure.
And that's what I'm hearing. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
There still is just that
And
concern. It's
increase that they are.
so high that will it be
Yeah, that-
possible?
Right.
to
That would
build
create the market
Yeah.
unit that could help pay for the, if we make them surface park, deal with snow or carport, that price per market rate unit is not gonna yield the income to justify the deed restricted unit, the trade that we're talking about.
Well, the cost per spot in a development like that goes way down because it's already part of the infrastructure. Your foundations are already deeper than normal and you can just build it into lower stories. You're not standalone parking garages are expensive.
We could get a seasonal community pool in there too.
Ooh.
Years, you know.
Now I was thinking maybe Andrew's
Just don't drain it.
I think.
Just don't drain it, just
Don't drain it.
pull the plug certain year.
I think you bring up an interesting point. We'll definitely investigate. that. Yeah,
Reverse bathtub.
yeah.
I like it.
Well, this is the first time I've heard that, parking underground could be more affordable if it was under a building. With existing infrastructure and building requirements versus just building a parking structure, because what I
caution
understand.
you on that. I'm gonna challenge Jim on that. I've dealt with parking structures a lot in my career. And you need ventilation, you need elevators, you need a lot of things that a foundation is not gonna yield. And the depths are not the
Like
same.
West Wall.
And so I would challenge, no offense, Jim, I'm gonna challenge you on that.
Well,
Yeah,
what,
it's like West Wall. It's just a part of the foundation system underneath the building.
No, there's a
One
one
story.
story to that cost. And those are some of the more expensive units.
Well, I mean, it's not just that, but it's.
There's a lot more.
It
cost.
probably has to do with the scale, right? On a Sixth Street Station scale project, like we start talking about, it makes sense, but.
Okay.
Well,
And that's what
Andrew's
Andrew's-
point,
that's-
yeah.
I wasn't even getting at it as far as a cost perspective. I was getting at it, if you're gonna have to use a third of your lot
Right.
for surface parking, right? Let's give them incentives so that they can bulk up their FAR by another 20%, not need to provide any surface parking, put the parking underneath. As you get into these $50 million projects, right, maybe that starts to make sense to that developer to say, okay, well, I'm gonna put it down there and I'm gonna have storage units for all my things, all my tenants, right, which can go down below there a little bit cheaper. And, mechanical spaces and all of that stuff that would go into a basement. That's gonna be very expensive. I don't know the numbers. I'm not gonna play that game of it, if it's gonna be cheaper than doing a parking garage, but it goes somewhere where it's not seen. It's not a visible 2-story parking garage in the middle of town where people go, oh, Crested Butte.
As long as we get
Mhm.
deed restricted units out of it.
that would be the
Yeah.
only
Okay.
way I would even consider it,
Okay.
right? Deed restricted units as part of that increase. That's-
Exactly.
I think that's, yeah.
That's worthy.
It's all.
I think that's a really interesting.
Because that plays the
Giving
incentive.
the developer something more, but.
Yeah.
And furthermore, that's kind of this whole conversation about this plan for Bellevue, right? Is
Yeah.
to increase the deed restricted
Yeah.
space for the deed restricted units.
We'll definitely look into that. So keeping kind of a similar trend going into 6, very similar here around performance incentives, but different sort of vision. Where Bellevue's that commercial core of town. 6 right now, it's kind of, we have our softball fields, we have the center for the arts, we have all these great things, but it's kind of this like divider and gap of the town. Could it be this more mixed use zone, this more community connector of both sides of town with kind of civic hubs like a potential library at the 4-way or other services and things, and more of an extension of Elk Avenue with retail and restaurants? Like, I'm really loving Thai chili as someone who lives over on that side of town. Like, it's awesome to have something near there, the Sherpa. Could there be more things like that with more housing, recognizing right on our bus route, right in the middle of town, connected to everything? So with here adding more residential land use allowances with a mix of retail, restaurant services and those community spaces, increasing residential density. There isn't a maximum here of 3 per parcel, but there is a maximum of 50% of the parcel on 6. But then instead of a 4-story here, those performance incentives that are considered are a 3 feet bonus. Where right now we've heard from folks and from our consultant that to have a really viable and marketable ground floor commercial product, you really can't do that with 2 stories of housing above with our 35 height limit. Where adding 3 feet, you could have that with 2 stories of housing above.
So that's get ceiling height in that commercial space below.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
then,
question
yeah.
that, like they're seeing that you have to have a retail space that has a 14-foot ceiling or something like that. I don't know what their calculation is. Yeah, you want an 18-inch minimum plug between the floors, but you said, well, 11-foot ceilings downstairs is plenty, 2-foot plenum for 3 floor systems, 2, 4, 6, plus 11 is 17. That's not, no, maybe it is 38, but I hesitate to say, these consultants come in here and say, well, this is what works in Telluride, this is what works in Oxford. Do we really need 14-foot ceilings to have a Gucci store down there?
But to get it as a bonus of you can get this if we get at least 20% deed restricted housing, where if you're not going to, ROA, we get our.
Okay. Another incentive.
Like, that's the idea of driving it. Can we give a little to get some?
So they don't have to do that height, but if they want to do that and create more space, they can.
And we could look at the under.
Yeah,
That's the way you can.
I just, the 38 seems like a lot to me, hitting this zone.
How tall is did you say how tall the fire department?
It's 35. We've no step back.
I'm curious to see how all the traffic is gonna work out coming down from the mountain with all this.
So regardless of what we do, the red lady, the Elk and 6th Street intersection is failing. And it'll go completely to F. It's below CDOT standards now. It'll go to F in 2030.
What's the
So,
long-term plan for that?
yeah, you can't widen it, right? So
A roundabout solves the problem, or a traffic signal solves the problem.
a roundabout.
A roundabout physically fits without taking any parking spaces. A traffic signal fits. So both of those handle the problem. The community has to choose.
Roundabout.
Seems to be.
You don't have to answer that today.
That's not, I mean,
Yeah, parking lot.
it's a future
Write it down.
Crested Butte problem.
Done.
But the idea is how can we set up 6 to be more of like that connector, that seam of the town, have more vibrancy.
You know, the
life
bus stop
there.
right there, so it'd be a premium spot to live or stay.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Great views of softball.
it's gonna be
Yeah,
interesting.
that too, and the mountain.
Yeah.
So the parking ride you said by Brush Creek, there's potential for above ground parking there?
Yeah, so when they have to realign Brush Creek to line up to Whetstone, and they create a space that could hold anywhere from 40, and I calculate about 100 parking spaces.
Yeah, it just as long as we don't, hopefully.
It's right at the takeout. So it
Yeah.
pulls away from the takeout, you know, the head-in parking right at the takeout?
Uh-huh.
The road pulls away and creates this triangle. That there's plenty of room for parking. And it's right at the underpass and it's right at the takeout.
So Andrew, going back to your point, are you like, oh, they don't need that, or do you think it could be a tool as like a
I'm
carrot?
looking at, 3 stories. I just, for them to say you need 38 feet to do 3 stories, I think is a fallacy. Maybe if the building steps back further, right, but 38, a tall building right on the road, I would.
I like
I
the
would
fact
be
that
able
if in this rendering, part of it is higher and part of it is lower, if it was all 38 feet around there. Or all 35 feet for that matter.
And they cut it back going to the neighborhoods to the west. So they did start cutting it back.
Right.
And that's one thing with the Bellevue example, that they didn't really get to the mass scale and form that our guidelines really, and the historic preservation plan asks for. And this one does, the design is really funky, but like the mass, the way it's broken up, that is the way our guidelines ask for that, how
Yeah.
they're broken up.
Yeah, could we get more nuance on Bellevue, so it's not just like a wall, a portion of the building?
Yeah.
Other thoughts on 6? Matt, do you want to add anything for 6?
Just that, we didn't, the committees were looking at this area, and we didn't want to put a 4th floor because we thought it would be impactful, right? Because it is a corridor through the middle of town. But we thought, 3 feet, which is the height of this table or countertop, on top of a 35-foot building, 3 more feet wouldn't be as an impact, great as an impact as the bonus or the town benefit of getting more units. So we thought 3 feet was feasible in this spot.
Yeah, I think studying makes more sense, right? Is it needed to have that 3 feet? And it's not the end of the world. I don't think if it was needed, I just would question whether or not you need 38. I guess it comes down to what kind of, parapets and false fronts you're doing up there.
Cost benefit analysis.
And we get more units, the town gets more of what the community needs is what we're all trying to do here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if anything, on Bellevue and 6, like that land use piece of the toolbox really comes in, where right now we really do limit residential in those areas. And by even just adjusting that dial to allow more, that would be a pretty big change. But how do we make sure we know it's not just simple supply and demand here? We're paradise, we're expensive, everyone wants to be here. We add more density, great. Do we just have more second home apartments? How do we really tie these things to make sure we get some permanent deed restrictions with those? So, other thoughts on 6?
This is a business corridor, just like Delk Avenue, so just pointing that out.
Please jump in.
Is that still a thing?
It's near, the T is near it, but it's not right on the street.
It's on the edges. We would through this really want to look at evaluating the zoning for the T zone and R4 to make sure it really meets that intent, and helps support the goals of this corridor. Who was online? Do you want to jump in?
I just had a couple quick comments on the mixed use ideas, the, proposed developments. I think that I love the idea of the mixed use with commercial on the ground floors, residential above. With that, I would also like the idea of, requiring affordable housing as part of that sort of development, taking up a percentage of that housing stock. The thought that all these market rate units, most likely the developers want to maximize the square footage. So in these renderings, all the parking is shown as on the street, which works during the day, but I'm not sure it would work as a resident solution. So where are the unit parking spaces in these sort of proposed designs, as well as, where do you keep the trash? Where are you stashing the snow from the roofs? Which in this sort of, maximizing the footprint of the lot type development, there's not a lot left over. So just questions as to what would be required in this sort of proposed development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for that. And Yes, I should definitely explain. They didn't just draw this rendering of great, pretty picture. We got this. We did last September had a design charrette where they really looked at different sites in town and kind of calculated out what could be possible under our current code, under different things. Like what if we lowered the parking by a little bit? So that scenario on Sixth Street, it wasn't like no parking. I believe what they looked at there was one space per residential unit, and then I think it was 1.8 per commercial per 1,000 square feet of commercial space. So it wasn't, they did look at those sorts of things.
Okay, and then just one other thought on the whole potential, fee for additional density or additional ADU spaces or less parking. In my experience, I would say if the client has the money to do the development, they would likely take the fee over the actual sort of requirement of the code, in my experience. And so I just feel that's kind of opposite of what we would want to promote. If you were saying you don't want the wealthy to be able to just move in and purchase their way into the community, but then essentially shut us out of it, out of their development, I would think it would be better for the code to encourage these sorts of, allowable additional affordable housing units or whatever, requiring them to do incorporate the parking and incorporate the ADUs and incorporate the additional affordable housing into the development versus giving them that fee out, because most likely they'll just take the fee out and then we're doubling all of our problems, parking and less housing, etc. So anyways, that was my 2 cents.
Oh, thank you so much for jumping in, Ben. That's really great feedback. So we are at 10 till, so I'm just gonna try to breeze through. I'm not sure how to, I lost the screen share, so I'm gonna just go back quickly. Any other things on 6 before we move forward? And again, please keep kind of thinking on all this and you're welcome to share more feedback. Really quickly, we'll just run through Slate River annexation. This is a quick one, and it kind of ties back to parking.
Yeah, so this is the area up on Pyramid Avenue, for those of you that aren't familiar. So to the north and the south of Pyramid Avenue. And so some of the land use ideas for this area is higher residential density, potentially recreation amenities. The idea, could the tennis courts be moved at some point if the four-way needs a different use in that area? Would this be a potential location for that? Community services, so for instance, like an assisted living or a senior living facility has been brought up as an idea. Also, a health clinic or a hospital branch, was that another use that was thought of for this area? I think at one point there was an idea of like a early education, but I think the school is filling that role now. Still discussions happening about all that, obviously. So, for density, like I just mentioned, increased density for this area. So you can see the 3 scenarios at the bottom pictures. The first one has the mass broken up into little buildings. The second one has mass similar to Mineral Point, so 3 buildings, which is the exact footprints, I think, that were Mineral Point, just plopped in that area to say, here's what this would look like, broken out, but not as broken out as the smaller structures, or the idea of one large structure in that area. So
These parcels are restricted to 30 feet in height by a covenant with,
Aperture.
thank you, aperture.
And so then kind of tying on to what Roy mentioned earlier, but reductions of parking in this area, using the on-street parking on Pyramid to kind of supplement what's there. But those are the kind of, to do a quick run through.
If my memory served me right, Torty Gauss was the architect, that all 3 scenarios have the same unit counts.
45
What?
units.
Yeah.
45.
And Aaron, our housing director, obviously, the more corners, the more buildings, the more expensive for the same number of units. So cost of construction needs to be considered too.
This is required to be publicly owned housing, but so this would be a town development, so a little different from what we've been talking about, but it really ties back to our zoning code, the fit piece going back to parking.
Okay.
Without that, we couldn't have fit 45 units here, but there is all that availability on Pyramid. So bringing it full circle to parking. Sorry, Andrew, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, so I just think this is the place to do it as affordably as you can. The building to the right is the most affordable one to do. I think you're getting more out of it.
Right.
You know, the 30 foot is unfortunate because this would be where I would vote for a 40 story.
And considering it's.
40 foot tall building. Yeah, it's the whole building where you can get, it's gonna be tough to fit 3 stories and 30 feet is all I'm
Yeah,
getting.
you're exactly right. Stu, we have, how many?
The extra 3 feet would come in handy on this.
The irony.
Like two,
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess you can go down, right?
Mineral Point is the same height restriction as part of the covenant, 30 feet. So the middle one, not only footprint, but height would be similar.
This kind of ties in with Mineral Point, right? It would sort of look like the same neighborhood.
It
It's
could.
right down.
It's right.
Right,
to
the
the
fire
south.
district directly to the north.
Yeah.
This
above
middle.
the fire department.
So whatever it is, it kind of seems to me like it ties in and becomes part of that same neighborhood.
Yeah.
The one thing, there would be a bit more flexibility because when Mineral Point was designed, the R4 zone district where Mineral Point is located in, it limits the amount of flat roof you can have and you have to incorporate some gabled pitches. And so it was a real challenge. And so those are things that when we update the guidelines, does that make sense for multifamily to have to look like a single family residence? Probably not.
Right.
No, the roofs on the buildings going in are really.
And this isn't in the historic district, so.
Right.
Right.
Well, we are at 5 till 4 till, so I don't want to keep you all from your dinners, but thank you all so much for spending your Monday here. You guys are truly the experts in this, so it is so helpful to have this discussion. We do have a feedback survey open until next Thursday, so if you're willing to help spread the word, if you're willing to take the survey, or just email us questions, comments, additional feedback on the plan, we would greatly appreciate it. And just know there's more to come. We'll make refinements to the plan, and then when we get into the code update, that's where we'd really love to more of your expertise as the rubber starts hitting the road there. So starting this summer and going into the fall. Kent, did you want to add something?
Just, another thing that I've brought up that hasn't been mentioned today is, live work units. Right, where you're actually creating a business as well as a dwelling and taxes and income, sales taxes as well, but creating community and creating small live work units is something I'd like to see incorporated into this plan. And I see it and we didn't get to it, but it's at the 4-way potentially where the tennis courts are. We could create another little zone of residential and commercial units there that are small, that speak to, local owners, not, out of town kind of franchise things.
It deals with parking too, because you kind of double up on that, right?
So live work units, I think, could be a big thing if we could figure out how to incorporate it.
But Andrew, yes.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
You're right. It's all tied together too.
Yeah, but it,
For those really central areas like the tennis courts, I think it works.
Yeah.
Great.
Right next to the
We did that in Eagle. We did 16 of them in Eagle. And it came with a lot of regulation because weld shop, a guy doing
Okay.
artisan welding could go in there and banging on metal all day, annoys the guy that's got an architecture shop next or 2 doors down.
no.
It wasn't
You
me,
just have the wrong taste in music for your headphones.
wasn't me. Anyway,
Metal.
it came with a lot of regulation to stipulation to try and work it
Can't
out.
happen, it can't happen.
Yeah, like a
But
bakery, not as big a deal. Somebody's an artisan bakery or something.
it kind of touches
Or
on.
an
what is
artist,
light
a lot of
industrial.
artists.
I think there's a broad definition of artist, that we could think about.
Yeah, it's the metallurgist that bothered most of the neighbors.
I wrote a live work for Louisville. You can specify what that means.
Yeah,
So you can, I agree 100% with you.
Yeah.
You have to think through the uses.
Yeah, one thought that
I love them.
with what Kent brought up at the 4-way, could that be an opportunity of like a town project where we would lease out the spaces to help incubate small businesses and
It's a-
could think
I
about
I
what
think it's a great idea.
Town
types of business to prioritize?
And so one of the proposals, general proposals, is right now the four-way right of way is not zoned anything. So we would zone it P. And then the town would have to own it. We could do the incubator. We can have exceptions to design standards. We have much more flexibility. So in the plan, you'll see a recommendation to zone the entire area. The big diamond on the zoning map is no zoning. We would zone that P.
Put tennis courts on the roof.
Does anybody play tennis anymore?
Don't occupy the.
No,
Oh, the sun.
there's a tennis player in the.
Would you rather play
Pickleball's
right on the busy four-way intersection or someplace?
I think what you should do is, if we're gonna add more people in town, we need to make sure we're accommodating more recreation in open space, either access to outside of the town or in it, but again, it's not housing, if nothing else matters, so we need it. So I think the proposal was either move some tennis courts over to Town Ranch or move it up to TP2, where we have room to get senior housing, and that's a decision that would come later.
Yeah.
But I think we can't sacrifice recreation.
Agreed.
We should also utilize the four-way better than
Mhm.
tennis courts that are under snow.
I agree.
Tennis court is, the four-way is not the right.
It's not the ideal use.
You not playing tennis there, it's busy and dump trucks are going by and all that.
Yeah, they're really nice courts. They're
Sounds
not
like
that
you're-
big.
If you're really affecting the experience.
There's not that many. Tennis players aren't that snowy.
Yeah.
Well,
Truth is,
thank you
I don't
guys
play
so
tennis.
much. Please do not hesitate to call us, stop in, or meet with us if you have other questions or ideas. We've heard some really great feedback today, but definitely think on these. There's a lot in here, so think on it and let us know.
Stay
And
engaged.
just thank you for your time. I know 2 hours on a Monday is a lot, so we really appreciate it. Cool.
It's been enjoyable.
Thank you, guys.
Hopefully, I
Good group of people here.
start.
In a minute of.
Thank you guys. Thank you for the bet.
I have.
Thank you.
That's